Hey guys, no intro because this is kind of serious. Well, at least relatively serious. I've just been thinking a lot since I did that talk about DNA the past couple of days, and things have started to settle a little bit now. And a couple things that I realized that makes this case a fucking nightmare for Bryan Kohberger. So I was talking about how, remember that the initial DNA was collected actually on scene by the Idaho State Forensic Team. And so they ran it through CODIS. When you run DNA through CODIS, you're using a process or looking for STR and the loci. And it's sort of a basic level search, and it's out of a small sample of people relatively small sample of people because these are the people who are the criminals that have been convicted. Okay. You run it through there with STR and you don't get a hit. And so the next thing that you do is you send it to Othram. Othram, the company that was a startup funded by a pseudo-Nazi right-wing political operative. He helped get them funding. They also got grants, I believe, from the University of Idaho and maybe even the state. So you send it to your buddy Othram, who is masked as a private genetic company, but is actually partnered with the state and funded initially by a right-wing political operative. I shouldn't say right-wing political operative. If you're a political operative, you switch sides. So it's like, anyway. So they send it to Othram, their buddy, who's actually becoming one of like the world's labs in terms of testing stuff. But anyway, they send to Othram, and Othram has this sophisticated software that I guess costs millions of dollars. Who knows? And then you need people trained to evaluate it, and they put it into this program, and they develop a more robust DNA analysis. Not only do they have the loci on there, they've got like thousands more genetic markers. And like we said, that this was developed for research initially for the government. Then they made it commercial because they wanted to make more money off of it. But ultimately, I'm wondering if their whole goal wasn't just to be able to really create a Kafkaesque trial for any single one of us, whether it's intentionally or not. This is a nightmare. Okay, so let me get back to the story and what I think. So, and now I understand why Ann Taylor is so angry. And she really is, she has a lot of grace under pressure. All right, so back to the story. So STR, CODIS, no hits at ISP. It got there from they collected the stuff from the crime scene, right? Then they send it to Othram, like we talked about. Othram builds it out, adds more genetic markers. All these things are based on statistical probabilities. It's just a program. It's a software. So now I understand what Anne is saying about the planting, because Othram created his DNA profile. That's one way of looking at it. Now, they would say that they interpreted his DNA file, but I think it could be said for either one because it's a program. Like I said, they're not looking under a microscope. It's a program based on statistical probabilities, and depending on what databases they're looking in and what the ethnicity of the people are, and if they have controls in their lab, if they are working with integrity and matching things, depending on all these things, right? They build a quote accurate profile, genetic profile. So They couldn't find a match, so they sent it to the FBI, and the FBI was able to find a match because they searched other databases that Othram was not willing to search. That's my opinion. It makes the most sense. I don't think the FBI did any more building out of Bryan Kohberger's SNP than Othram could have done. Othram could do whatever the FBI does and more. It's just that the FBI is the group or the agency that is untouchable, and so they are willing to break a policy. And just a word on policy for a second. You know, the prosecution in this case is saying, and is acting as if they broke the law. They didn't. They just, didn't abide by a policy, and he scuffs it off. Well, the question is, why does the FBI have a policy? Right? Why did they develop a policy on privacy rights and protection for searches? Well, it's because they believe if you're an FBI agent, you act with integrity. You don't take evidence that you are not ethically or morally against. That's why they have policies. Like if you work at a place and you break a policy, or at Starbucks and you break a policy, something stupid, you light up a cigarette in the middle of a work shift, right? Like you're breaking a policy. I don't think that's considered illegal, possibly nowadays, but anyway, but it's against their policy, and then you have to leave, right? Well, why is it against their policy? Well, because they don't want to promote an environment in which people think it's okay to break the rules and just come into Starbucks. And so you're behaving in a manner representing the company that the company doesn't think is a good idea. And if you work there, you should probably think it's not a good idea either. So they make this policy and they broke it. It is a big deal that they broke it. Anyway, but in the court of law, it doesn't matter, right? So I asked in that talk I did last night or the day before, I said, I wonder if when they got Bryan Kohberger's father. Okay, so now they're all right. Wait, we missed a step. So here's the thing. How did they identify? This is so sick. How did they identify? How did they determine that Bryan Kohberger was their suspect, right? And this has a different meaning for me now because I understand what's going on, because I just read some of the old filings. So the initial DNA at ISP, right, is sent, a little bit of that is sent out to Othram, and I'm assuming the rest of it could be gone. I don't know if Othram uses it all up and then it just poofs, it's gone. Or I would hope that they just have a little bit of that profile left, because here's what's making me sick. If this is true and this is what has happened, it's really bad. That STR profile, when they sent it to Othram, they really didn't have a lot to begin with. They used some for CODIS. They sent it to Othram. Okay. What if in the process of whatever Othram's doing, the rest of it is just gone, right? When they run it through their program for the first time. And then it starts building out its digital statistical probability matches in its system. And what's the sample size in that system, right? So regardless, when it starts doing that, let's say all that DNA is now gone. The original DNA is gone because it's been used up in testing. I'm assuming the worst. So now when Bryan Kohberger's father matches the profile that, let's face it, was created, of course it would make sense, right, that his father would match with that profile as another relative, right? But when they got Bryan Kohberger's buccal swab DNA, from what I can tell and from what Ann said, and this is the worst part, they didn't that DNA swab that he did, yeah, it matches the profile of the unknown suspect in their SNP file, in their genealogy genetic tree file. It matches that suspect, right? But I asked this last night. When they did that, they matched it against the SMP suspect. Well, his father was matched and was said to be once they matched it all up, it was said to be, when they matched his father in there, and it said it was a close relative, right? That's also to an SMP. Real DNA to SNP. But did they do STR and see what happened first and then SMP? These are the details that matter. Because if they didn't, it's almost like a self-confirmation loop. It's creating based on statistical probabilities, this digital profile. It's not based on looking under a microscope, as far as I can tell. It's all mapped out in this program. And so when they get that result, I don't think it's the same as like looking under a microscope, right? They can't possibly see all that stuff under the microscope. So they're sort of like mapping it out statistically, something that's not completely mapped out at all, the human genome, right? I don't think it's completely mapped out yet. Or if it is, it's been recent. So it's building this based on these statistical numbers that scientists have given us over the years, whatever. And they're not just pointing to one unknown suspect, right? It could be unknown suspect, and there's like 3 of them that are kind of starting to fill in around this SNP profile. But if SNP develops a profile, right, based on probabilities and statistics, it's drawing from its own program. So it would make sense that every time you use SNP, that you're always going to find people in that program that are related to this unknown subject. Right? It's like it's a negative. You know what I would like to know, and hopefully it's available. If you upload, can you upload a SMP file that was developed not with your software, with another software, and run it through your database and get hits? Right? It's like a control measure, because otherwise you're basically creating a profile, and then of course it's going to match to some relatives in your files because the statistical analysis and probability drew from your files. I don't know. These are the kind of things, but she doesn't need to know that. What Anne needs to know is when they got Bryan Kohberger's buccal swab, did they test it against the original DNA through CODIS? Like, did they do an STR to STR analysis? Did they do that? Because what if they did it and it didn't match? Then it doesn't matter what Othram did, right? It doesn't matter what Othram did if his 2 STR things don't match. And she's saying they did not do that. And that makes me really nervous because now you're stuck in a Kafkaesque nightmare because it's not you, but they created a profile based on pieces of you, developed your relatives, and when they swab you, of course it's going to match this digital created profile. So here's the thing that made me realize that. I read this right here. Where are we? This is in one of, it's Anne's third motion to compel. And let's see. All right. It says, based upon information from experts in the field, I have learned that once a genetic genealogy profile is created and testing by the private lab is completed, the profile is uploaded to a database that contains similar data from other individuals. Once the genetic genealogy profile is uploaded, the profile is compared within that database and relatives are identified. So obviously, right? All right. So anyway, maybe not so obviously. I don't know. I just feel like those are the kind of things you need to know. And if you don't have any government oversight in terms of what's ethical and what's not, these types of programs can get developed and they become so ingrained in the culture of the thing that they become unquestionable at some point. And so now is the time when we should be questioning this stuff, because this is dystopian if in fact that's how it works. I need to look into it more so I could be overreacting. But this part here, it is my understanding that once possible relatives have been identified, their identities are used to construct a family tree to identify possible suspects using public records and, in some instances, like we said, contacting individuals for further family information. Remember, genetic witnesses. This process leads to a pool of individuals rather than one specific individual. See, I didn't know that. And that was the first thing that made my alarms go off. So when they're developing this SNP profile and building out these trees, it's coming from they don't just have like unknown suspect A, and that's who will in the future be Bryan. They have like several of these unknown people. Okay, so that's crazy. Okay. So the possibility, now here's where it gets interesting. The possibility of other relatives who might be similar to Mr. Kohberger is extremely important to the defense in this case. The processes used in this method of identification may be extremely important to Mr. Kohberger's defense. The timing and the steps utilized are extremely important to Mr. Kohberger's case investigation and defense. I think she just dropped us a huge ass hint, and I don't know if anybody else has seen it, but it kind of confirms with, I had said, one of the things I thought from the beginning is that it was possibly a relative of Bryan. And, I think Anne and Bryan think that too. What do you guys think of that? Let me read it one more time. Maybe you'll see what I'm saying. It is my this is Anne saying this in a supplemental request for more freaking information because they're not giving them anything. It is my understanding that once possible relatives have been identified, their identities are used to construct a family tree to identify possible suspects using public records and sometimes even contacting individuals for further family information. This process leads to a pool of individuals rather than one specific individual. I mean, that one just blew my mind, okay? See how accurate it is? It doesn't come up with one, it comes up with three, which I'm sure it is fairly accurate, right? I'm sure it's fairly accurate. But it's not perfect if it's coming up with three. It's not the same. It doesn't make any sense to me, right? I mean, it's not specific enough. It just shows you it's all programming, probabilities, and statistics. And a lot of times those things can be accurate, but we also know how the math can be good, but the concept that you build it around is wrong. And that's what worries me with these databases. But here's the next one. You guys ready for this one again? This process leads to a pool of individuals rather than one specific one. The possibility of other relatives who might be similar to Mr. Kohberger is extremely important to the defense in this case. I mean, the processes used in this method of identification may be not important, it may be extremely important to Mr. Kohberger's defense. And then here's the last one that clinches it. The timing and steps utilized are extremely important to Mr. Kohberger's case investigation and defense. So she didn't have to add that paragraph in there to get her point across. She didn't have to say anything about the relative. She's given a really good argument for all these things. But this gives us, I believe, a hint at what her defense is going to be. And it's possibly third party culprit. We can obviously agree she's going to use one, but this makes me feel like she is going to, they're trying to identify a cousin of his. That's what I think. I really believe that. And for them to think that way, I mean, did they talk to their client and he told them, yeah, I have cousins around here or in the area? I didn't know they were doing anything, but I mean, I wonder what it is. Because the way his car drives around, first of all, I don't want to admit that that's even his car, right? But I was just going back over the probable cause affidavit because, once again, trying to figure out how they got to Bryan Kohberger. And I finally remember now because this case is so complex. It finally dawned on me, okay, that this is kind of what they say, at least in the FBI, in the probable cause affidavit. Now, the reason why it doesn't make it's just a little odd, but so basically, November 25th in the probable cause affidavit is when they say Officer Tiango at WSU queried white Elantras registered at WSU. So that's funny in and of itself because did they listen to that kid who called in the tip line and said they should try that? Anyway, up until this point in the investigation, what did they have? They claim they had pieced together this Hyundai white Elantra, right? Not through the cell dump because it was offline most of the time, but through cameras, right? And also, actually, you know what though? Yeah, because they didn't do his phone later. But anyway, they pieced it together through cameras, okay? And it was a 2011 to 2013, remember, right? Initially. Well, the next step is they have this, and so they decide, now that they know it's a Hyundai Elantra 2011 to 2013, based on the FBI guy, they decide they're letting people know, be on the lookout for this, whatever. And so Officer Tiango decides to query the white Elantras registered at WSU. Now, when he did this on November 25th, actually, was it November 25th? I'm sorry, it was November 29th when he did this, okay? He did it at 12:28 a.m. And when he did that, he found that there was a white Hyundai Elantra registered to Bryan Kohberger, who lived in Pennsylvania. This was on November 29th at 12:28 a.m., okay? 2 questions about this. When you have access to cars that are registered at WSU, I know you get their license plate and the owner's name and number and, their probably their date of birth, their phone number, these kind of things, right? Because I registered my car when I lived on campus. So those are the things you'll need. What I'm wondering is if at that time they were looking for a 2011 to 2013, how did Bryan's come up in the search? Or are they not able to search by year in that? I'd like to know, the question is, in the WSU registration database that police have access to, how do you do a cross-check for a vehicle that you have a BOLO for? a white Hyundai Elantra 2011 to 2013. What do you put in there? Because if they put in the years, then there's no way that he would have found this match. But if they don't need it or he's snooping around, okay, fine, let's just give him this. 1228 WSU says on November 29th that this this is a car that belongs to Bryan Kohberger. It's registered in Pennsylvania. Okay. This is the stuff in this case that makes you just say, you guys have got to be full of shit. Because the same day, November 29th, 30 minutes later, at 12:58 a.m., another officer decided he was just going to be driving around looking for a white, looking for one of these things. And then he happens to find a white Hyundai Elantra in this parking lot. So he runs the tags and it comes back to Bryan Kohberger. But this time they come back as Washington State tags. Now this was November 29th. So I'm guessing that when they checked WSU, that maybe it just hadn't been updated in the system, but he registered his car in Washington on November 18th. So that's 11 days later. You would expect it to be updated in the system. But anyway, that's when they first got Bryan Kohberger. That's where the name came up. From what I can tell, just from their probable cause affidavit. Do I believe this? No, I don't believe this. But I needed to understand at least where the prosecution is starting their timeline from. They're saying that, I'm sure there's other things, obviously, but they're basically saying that they were looking at video cameras canvassing in the neighborhood. They did an AT&T cell dump. They pieced together this white car. That's when they came out with a Hyundai Elantra based on an FBI person telling them 2011 to 2013. And then randomly one day, November 29th, Tiengo starts searching the WSU student registrations on campus, and he gets this 2015, right? Hyundai Elantra, Bryan Kohberger, Pennsylvania registration, lives in Steptoe or wherever it was. And the same day, a half hour later, another guy sees in the parking lot, he's at Brian's house. He just happens to be there at a half hour later. I doubt it. He must have gone over there because this guy told him to. It's got to be. They make it sound in the PCA though, they're like, and unbeknownst to him, like they both got this light bulb at the same time. It's just bizarre. Anyway. And of course it would show up Washington registration because he's running the tags. So that makes sense. Anyway, that's where they got him. That's where it started from, right? That's where it started from, I guess. The other thing is, everybody's beating this with the dead horse, but I've been reviewing it again, and I'm just like, this is why I never believed this, because it's so far-fetched, because they're saying, so just quick bullet points on the PCA. Payne arrived at 4 p.m. The Idaho State Police Forensic Lab was on the scene. Like, they would have been the one, I would assume, to take that button snap. Officer Smith was one of the first people on the scene. So when Payne comes up, Smith is like, hey, let me walk you through it, right? So Payne says, as he's approaching Xana's room, okay, he mentions the bathroom on the left, and then he says he sees Xana laying on the floor. So from his position in the hallway, he sees her on the floor. So it gives you an idea of where she is. And he describes an edged weapon. Ethan, he doesn't mention seeing him at that point. So it must be once he walked into the room, which some people have theorized he was behind the door because that's why it was hard to get in. Regardless, he doesn't mention his position, but he says sharp force injuries. Susanna is edged weapon, and Ethan is a sharp force injury. And just a consideration, Ethan, his parents weren't able to bury him right away like the others. He wasn't finished with his autopsy until I think it was in December 15th. This makes me really sad. I mean, you know, in the PCA it mentions the wound, the way the wounds look, sharp force injury. They say this is coming from a autopsy performed in Spokane. Okay. And the report came back December 15th. So Ethan had to go to a separate medical examiner, someone more specialized, to evaluate his cause of death. I mean, that's brutal. Then, so let's just go on. God rest their souls, all of them and their families. I pray for them to heal from this. I don't, it's really sad. All right, so let me get to the meat and potatoes, as Harsh would say. Sorry. So things that Payne learned earlier. I'm sorry, things that Payne learned later. The dog in Kaylee's room, that was something he was told later. And Officer Nunez, his body cam is how Payne learned about that. And Officer Nunez, it sounds like, was also one of the first on the scene. So Nunez and Smith. We also know that they interviewed Jack DeCour on November 13th. When Officer Smith is walking Payne through the house, before they go to Maddie's room, he points out a small bathroom, and this bathroom wall shares a wall with Maddie's bedroom. Why did they put that in the PCA? This is the kind of stuff, like, I always notice stuff that's out of place. Why is that in there? Why are they talking about the bathroom? Why wasn't the next sentence just, I entered Maddie Mogan's room? Does it mean something? I don't know. Then they see Kaylee and Maddie on the single bed, and all it says is visible stab wounds, and that's it. There's no mention of how they're positioned or anything like that. But another thing that Payne later notices was just a small little thing called a sheath. This is a total, I'm just sketching here, but I read this and I just had to break it down because I'm just curious what people think. This struck me. It says, this object appeared to be a tan leather knife sheath laying on the bed next to Mogan's right side. Do you guys notice a word that could be completely omitted here and it wouldn't make a difference? I'll read it again. Appeared to be a tan leather knife sheath laying on the bed next to Mogan's side. This word is bothering me in the middle here. Laying. Because I could read it like this. Appeared to be a tan leather knife sheath on the bed next to Mogan's side. You don't need the word laying on the bed. Laying. He's giving this knife life. It's like he believes the knife has laid itself there, right? Which tells me somebody laid that knife there, and he knows who did that. That's what this sounds like to me, because I don't understand any other reason why you would use that phrase. The knife sheath laying on the bed next to Maddie Mogan. Think about yourself if you were going to talk about, I don't know, how about, let's just talk about a tie. Like you bought someone a tie and you put it on the bed, right? Would you say, oh, the tie is upstairs. When you go through the door, you see it on the right. It's laying on the bed. It doesn't seem right. I would just be like, the tie is upstairs on the bed. I could be wrong, and I could be picking something apart that shouldn't be, but I just think it's completely bizarre. I just feel like he's personifying the sheath. It's a sheath. It's not alive, right? So let's go into this one. Everyone was home by 2 a.m. Everyone was in their rooms by 4 a.m. Let's just review what was happening between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. inside the house and outside the house. So let's start with, let me just find it because I have a, all right, so inside the house, this is what's going on between 4 a.m. and 4:25 a.m. Somewhere around 4 a.m., Santa is getting a DoorDash, and it was delivered, and she got it. Also, somewhere around 4 a.m., Dylan hears Kaylee upstairs playing with the dog. Soon after, maybe around 4:12 a.m., Dylan hears Kaylee say, "There's someone here." But the detectives in the probable cause affidavit want us to think that maybe, or they don't want us to think, well, no, they want us to think that it was possibly Xana. So they're putting these two options out there because I'm sure that's what Dylan said. They wanted her to sound more confident in this, but regardless. So Xana Kernodle was awake at 4:12. So now we know both Xana and Dylan are awake at 4:12 a.m. because Xana had just gone downstairs, got her DoorDash, come back upstairs, and she is on TikTok. And we know that Dylan is also awake because she's looking out to hear who's talking and who's saying who's here and stuff like that. At that time, she looks out the door because somebody said someone's here, and she looks out and she doesn't see anything. So she shuts her door. Sometime later, I'm saying that because they use the word approximately, Dylan hears someone crying. She thinks it might be Xana. And Ann Taylor said something, one of the in the testimony said in the bathroom. So who knows what, but again, this is what she's saying. They want us to believe, okay? And she hears, "It's okay. I'm going to help you." And then at 4:17, I'm sorry. So she opens the door because someone said, "Is someone here?" Closes the door. Then she hears some crying. She hears someone say, "It's okay. I'm here to help you." And then she opens the door again. And that is when she sees the person, walking toward her. The person is now walking towards her. And that's another thing we talked about, like, which way is this person coming from? I thought they would have to be coming from down the stairs right in front of her room, because if you think it's the first two were killed on the second floor and then they were killed, I don't know. Anyway, he walks towards her, he walks out the back, okay? And then she shuts the door and locks it. Okay, so this was between 4:12, because we know they were awake. She opened the door, shut it, opened the door, shut it. Okay? That's what's going on inside of the house between 4 and 4:25 a.m., which is the probable cause affidavit. When the homicides occurred? What's going on outside of the house during this time, according to the affidavit? Well, suspect vehicle 1 is driving east towards the King Road house. They pass it, they turn around in front of 500 Queen, and then as they're driving back west, they attempt to park and turn around in that driveway, in 1122 King Road driveway. This is approximately 4:04. But I'm gonna guess, like, by the time they're trying to park in front of that driveway, it's gotta be, I would say, around 4:06, right? A couple minutes, because they drove all the way up, drove around, pulled back, or maybe it's 4:05. Regardless, they're trying to park in the 1122 King Road parking lot? What? This is 4:06. Now remember, DoorDash got there at approximately 4 AM. So how did they maybe see the person in the driveway? Were they the actual DoorDash driver? Like, I'm so tired of this argument. I obviously have done this before. I don't know. It's just insane that, like, this person who planned this, it has to be planned. This was not just like a whatever. No, this was planned. So if you planned it for a specific time, I would think you're surveilling the property, you know, the habits, et cetera, et cetera. These are college kids at 4 AM. Everybody's going to be awake. And it sounds like they were. It doesn't sound like they were sleeping at all. Kaylee didn't sound like she was sleeping, playing with the dog. Dylan definitely wasn't asleep because she kept getting up and down. And Xana was awake. At least they were all awake. So you have somebody on, like, the downstairs and the upstairs that were both awake. So they had to know something. They were not asleep when this happened. I think this is just a rumor that most people realize isn't true. So after they try to park there, then they go back towards the intersection of King and Queen. Then they do a 3-point turn and drive back towards Queen Street. Back towards the, Queen Street apartments. So this whole little thing here, this whole little person who clearly looks like they're lost and they're looking for an address on their Google or Waze that isn't matching with reality. This is what this sounds like out of context, right? Even in context, but okay. It's got to take several minutes. 4:04 to say I'm going to say 3 minutes. So let's just say 4:07 for all of that. All right. And remember, it's 4 AM to 4:25 for the time of the murder. Remember, inside of the house now at 4:07, it's not even 4:12 yet when Xana is awake on her TikTok. And Dylan looks out the door sometime after that and sees the person leaving, right? And shuts her door for the last time. Actually then goes downstairs with Bethany and sleeps down there before she goes back up to her bedroom later. I'm just making it. I don't know. Anyway, so that'll happen at 4:07. And then also happening outside is at 4:17, the camera at 1112 King picks up audio of whimpering, crying, and a thud. That's at 4:17. Right? At 4:17. And then at 4:20 AM, Moscow Police Department says this suspect vehicle is traveling southbound on Walenta at a high speed. Now, that's just, I guess it's possible, right? It just seems, it just doesn't seem like it fits. And I wonder if they considered people on foot, that this white car, I'm not saying it's Brian's, but whoever's it is, as a distraction. I just don't know. I mean, if somebody really, really planned this out, they could do that with a car as a distraction. And like, what if they had to have talked to the DoorDash driver and they know what kind of car he has. But I'm just saying, if you're planning a crime and you're an evil genius, That could be an element of it as a distraction because you know the detectives will get the cameras in the area, and they're gonna focus on that white car, right? And then they're building their whole case in the beginning around this white car. So there's an actual white car that's there at the murders and traveling the roads and looking suspicious, right? But it was planted there by the evil genius that actually committed the murders in the house. Maybe the person that's driving the white car doesn't even realize that they're doing this. Maybe they're on a goose chase looking to pick someone up or talk. I mean, who knows? There's so many possibilities, but they want to call this vehicle Bryan Kohberger's vehicle. And so that means they believe that with Xana awake at 4:12, with Dylan awake at 4:12, with a DoorDash driver that was there within minutes of the arrival of the murderer, that Kaylee is awake. There's a dog in the house. So they're saying between 4:15 and 4:20 it occurred, because I'm trying to understand how one person does this. If it was two people, I would be like, okay, that makes sense. It would not be hard to fathom. But one person doing this does not seem humanly possible. 4:12, she's awake on TikTok. Dylan's awake. People are awake. But nobody called 911. Something really wrong with that. So that was really it, guys. I just kind of finally realized what I had read and realized like 20 times since I started following this case, which is it was the white Elantra. It was the white Elantra and their video piecemeal and the gas station attendants psyop white Elantra that was not even a white Elantra. It was all of that they were focusing on. And then they, found this vehicle registered WSU. Did they check University of Idaho too for that? Did they do both of those things? And honestly, they did it on November 29th, and good for them. But, well, you know what? I should be kinder. They probably didn't get the description of the vehicle from the FBI person until then. So as soon as they got it, that's why they both kind of simultaneously were looking for it at the same time. That would explain that. That's a more kinder view to explain that. So most likely that's what that was, right? They just got this information released, and so people were cross-checking it. Maybe they did check Idaho and they didn't find anything. They're not going to tell us that. But then they get his car. Once they had his car, that was the wrong year. That's the problem. And this is where the case starts to irritate me, and I get more critical because of these little things like, okay. So that's how they got him, though. That's how they got his name and everything. And in the background, allegedly during this time, the STR profile is not giving any results for CODIS. And so they've shipped it off to Othram. And Othram is building it out. And they're getting closer by the day. And on December 12th, it sounds like they had it narrowed down pretty good because Christy was told his name on December 13th. December 19th apparently is when the genealogy thing came out. Now, and he wasn't arrested till the 30th because they wanted to go get his DNA. But December 13th is when they started swirling his name around. Was his name one of several names? And is that why at that time Steve Gonsalves was open to the fact that it could be somebody else? because he knew that there was a pool of suspects. And so they told him, these 3 suspects, right? Suspect A, that could be Bryan Kohberger, is like 90% likely to be the guy. But suspect B is like 50 and suspect C is 60 or whatever it is, right? And so Christy was just like, okay, that's the one, A. Like, she's just going to focus on the most likely one. And Steve's like, well, I'm open to other possibilities, right? That would make sense. And then they narrowed it down further, and then Steve didn't want to change his mind anymore, and he said he knows it's him. And I can understand why he feels that way, because that's the way it looks if you don't break it down and realize that the S&P profile, the way that they do those, I don't know if it's scientifically valid. I don't believe they've done any peer-reviewed research on these databases, these methods of identifying people with genetic genealogy, right? So what was Harsh's question earlier? He wanted to know where they got the DNA. Well, they created it. They created the DNA. They created a statistical, mathematical file of his DNA based on probabilities and their algorithms and yada, yada. Which is why I think when you upload your DNA separately into other systems, right? You'll have different variations on your ethnicity. And it just goes back to the same argument until somebody can tell me I'm wrong. And obviously the danger is it's more totalitarian and it's more difficult to fight, especially when we keep thinking that DNA is a gold standard, and it's never been a gold standard. It's always been just another piece of corroborating evidence. Strong in a lot of cases, but we need to recognize it's not infallible. It's not these ridiculous odds that they're giving us. That there are possibilities that it's not the right person and the errors are made and things like that. But I'm starting to really, really think now that Anne and Bryan and the Senate team also really, really think that a relative of his could be a culprit. That's just my read on it, guys. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And if you liked it, I will do more DNA talks. I have some lost footage files coming up soon. And I hope you guys all have a good night. Let me just play some music to get out of here. Let's do the here we go.
Cause I don't give a fuck what you say. Yeah, I'ma do shit my way. So you can go kick rocks, I'ma stack bricks up, build what I want to make. Yo, I got a lot of shit to say, so I'ma do this every day. I'll be writing things until I'm fucking buried in my grave. 6 feet deep under, but my body won't decay. Cause my messages are timeless, so they'll put them on display. Oh yeah, I rap with a certainty, I have a sense of urgency. A message for eternity, for everyone internally. I had some people burning me, but now they fucking learn to see I ain't the one to fuck with. Now they looking nervously, and I don't really care what you think of me respectfully. You can kick rocks if you think you're fucking better, see. I will outwork you, turn you to an enemy. Hurt you so bad that you're gonna need some therapy. I got the motherfucking recipe. I've been cooking up hits, I'ma leave a legacy. You'll be looking small when you're standing right next to me. I'm 5'10", bitch, but I'm 10 feet next to me. I don't give a fuck what you say. Yeah, I'ma do shit my way. So you can go kick rocks, I'ma stack bricks up, build what I want to make. Cause I don't give a fuck what you say. Yeah, I'ma do shit.
Have a good night, guys. Thanks for listening.